Dawn has not yet broken over the cane fields of Maui when the first machetes begin to move, and already the air carries something beyond the sweetness of cut stalks. Something older, heavier, a kind of ordered silence that belongs not to nature but to engineering, the same silence that settles over a factory floor when every component is performing exactly as designed, when the system is so perfectly calibrated that the suffering inside it becomes indistinguishable from efficiency, until the smell of boiling syrup and the low mechanical groan of iron-crushing rollers and the vibration conducted upward through hardwood floors into the soles of human feet all merge into a single sensation that the men who built this place would have called productivity, and that the men who worked it would have called something else entirely. Something about this place has never quite fit the official story. The official story says Hawaii was discovered, then civilized, then developed, then annexed, and then eventually liberated. But the deeper you look, the more that sequence begins to fall apart, because every single one of those words, examined carefully, turns out to mean the same thing: extracted. To understand how this ended and why it never fully ended, you have to go back to the moment men decided paradise could be made profitable. The year is 1820. The ship is the Thaddeus, and the men aboard it have not come for sugar. Reverend Hiram Bingham arrives in the Hawaiian Islands, then called the Sandwich Islands, in April of that year, dispatched by the American Board of Commissioners for Foreign Missions with a mandate to save souls. He brings Christianity, literacy, and the absolute conviction that the civilization he carries in his luggage is superior to the one he has sailed 12,000 miles to correct. What he finds is a functioning society organized around the Ahupua'a, a land division system running from mountain ridge to ocean reef, managing water, agriculture, and community in a single integrated structure that has sustained human life on these islands for more than 1,000 years. Bingham does not see a system. He sees a problem to be solved. And this is where the first pattern begins, the one that will repeat across the entire arc of what follows, the pattern of a solution arriving before anyone has asked for it. The missionaries establish schools, print newspapers, reduce the Hawaiian language to written form, and earn the deep, genuine trust of the Hawaiian alii, the chiefly class. They are, by all documented accounts, sincere. That sincerity is precisely what makes what comes next so difficult to explain away. Because by the 1840s, the children of those missionaries, men like Amos Starr Cook and Samuel Northrop Castle, who will co-found Castle and Cook in 1851, have begun to see the islands not as a field for spiritual harvest, but as a field for a different kind entirely. The land is volcanic, deep, extraordinarily fertile. The climate is ideal for a single crop that the industrializing world cannot get enough of: sugar. The first experimental sugar plots appear on Oahu by the mid-1820s. They are modest, tentative, almost accidental, but they are not innocent because behind them already is the logic of capital. Boston counting houses watching commodity prices, merchant families calculating freight costs, investors in New England whose connection to Hawaiian soil is purely numerical. The irony that defines everything that follows announces itself here quietly before anyone is paying close attention. The system built to civilize and uplift Hawaiian society will become, with precise mechanical efficiency, the system of its dispossession. The more productive the land, the more essential it becomes to remove Hawaiians from it. That is not an accusation, that is what the documents show. By 1848, the mechanism of removal has a name: the Great Mahele. King Kamehameha III, advised closely by Gerrit P. Judd, an American physician turned political counselor whose influence over the Hawaiian kingdom in this period cannot be overstated, oversees a fundamental restructuring of Hawaiian land tenure. The traditional Ahupua'a system held land in a form of communal stewardship. It could not, legally or conceptually, be purchased by foreigners. The Great Mahele converts that communal tenure into alienable private property. The Mahele Book, preserved in the Hawaii State Archives, records the redistribution in meticulous columns: who received which parcel, what acreage on which island. What the columns do not record, because bureaucratic documents rarely record what they displace, is the full scale of what native Hawaiians lost in the years immediately following. Of the Maka'ainana, the commoner class whose labor had always sustained the land, only a fraction successfully navigated the Land Commission claim process. which required filing fees, legal knowledge, and a relationship with a bureaucratic system that had been designed by the same foreign advisors who stood to benefit from its outcomes. The pattern here is not subtle. Within a single generation, the majority of Hawaii's arable land passes into foreign hands. The most powerful machine they built was not made of iron. It was a document. With land secured, the industrial infrastructure follows with the inevitability of a second gear engaging a first. By the 1850s and into the 1870s, plantations are being established across Maui and Oahu, capitalized by Boston investment houses, equipped with steam-powered crushing mills imported from the mainland, and operated according to a production logic borrowed directly from the industrial factory floor. Castle and Cook and their contemporaries are building not farms but systems, organisms in which every component, from the irrigation ditch to the labor contract to the shipping agent, is engineered for a single output. The irrigation infrastructure alone is staggering in its ambition, miles of hand-dug ditches tunneled through volcanic rock, redirecting water from the wet windward slopes to the dry leeward fields where cane grows fastest. An engineering achievement that transforms marginal land into some of the most productive sugar acreage on Earth. The land had been cleared. Now they needed bodies to work it. The native Hawaiian population, devastated by introduced diseases across the preceding decades, measles, influenza, smallpox, striking communities with no prior exposure, has collapsed from an estimated several 100,000 at first Western contact to fewer than 40,000 by mid-century. Plantation owners, with the particular moral logic of men who have already solved the problem of land ownership to their own satisfaction, declare native Hawaiians an insufficient labor supply and engineer a solution. The Masters and Servants Act of 1850 creates a system of penal labor contracts. Workers who sign agree to a fixed term of service at a fixed wage, and any worker who abandons that contract faces criminal prosecution. It is, in its legal architecture, a mechanism of controlled coercion, not slavery in the chattel sense, but a system in which the contract itself functions as a chain, legally binding a human being to a specific piece of ground for a specific number of years with no practical avenue of exit. On paper, they were laborers. In practice, they were load-bearing parts. Chinese workers arrived first, beginning in 1852, then Portuguese workers from Madeira and the Azores. Then in vastly larger numbers beginning in 1885 under the Convention of 1886 negotiated between the Hawaiian Kingdom and the Meiji government of Japan, Japanese workers begin arriving by the thousands, eventually across 4 decades, numbering approximately 180,000 individuals who will cross the Pacific under labor contracts promising wages that, in the physical reality of plantation camps, rarely matched what the recruiting agents in Hiroshima or Yamaguchi Prefecture had described. Bureau of Immigration annual reports, preserved in the Hawaii State Archives, document these arrivals with the clinical efficiency of inventory logs, names sometimes recorded, sometimes not, ages approximated, destinations assigned by plantation agency before the ship docks. The plantation by this point is no longer simply an agricultural operation. It has become a vertically integrated economic organism of a kind that has few parallels in American history. 5 agency houses, Castle and Cook, Alexander and Baldwin, C. Brewer and Company, Theo H. Davies and Company, and AMFAC, the entity that will come to be known collectively as the Big Five, operate as the connective tissue of the entire Hawaiian economy. They are simultaneously the planters' agents, the shipping companies, the banks, the importers of plantation equipment, the operators of retail stores in plantation camps, and increasingly the effective authors of Hawaiian legislative policy. Henry Perrine Baldwin of Alexander and Baldwin and Lorin Thurston, an attorney whose family connections to the missionary generation are impeccable and whose commitment to plantation interests is absolute, move between boardroom and legislature with a fluency that makes the distinction between private interest and public governance functionally meaningless. The Hawaii Sugar Planters Association, founded in 1895, coordinates labor policy, wage suppression, and political lobbying with the precision of a single corporate entity managing multiple subsidiaries. They didn't just grow sugar, they grew a government. Within the plantation camps themselves, the system of control operates at a granular, daily level. Luna, overseers, drawn predominantly from Portuguese immigrant families who occupy a middle tier in the plantation's racial hierarchy, supervise work gangs in the fields with documented authority to enforce discipline physically. Labor dispute court records and reports in the Hawaiian Gazette describe conditions that workers endured without legal recourse, and plantation management documents from this era held in the Bishop Museum archives include instructions to Luna that reveal an explicit policy of ethnic segregation. Japanese workers in one camp, Chinese in another, Filipino in a third, Portuguese in housing of marginally higher quality, all deliberately separated to prevent the formation of cross-ethnic solidarity that might produce organized resistance. Fines for contract violations, tardiness, perceived insubordination, failure to meet daily cutting quotas, consumed portions of wages that were already insufficient. Workers who protested individually found themselves before magistrates whose sympathies, given the structure of the society around them, were entirely predictable. The machine had learned to police itself, and yet resistance kept emerging, not because the machine failed to suppress it, but because no system of control, however well engineered, can fully extinguish the human capacity to object to its own reduction. By the late 1880s, the resistance has begun to accumulate sufficient force to threaten the plantation order at a level its architects had not anticipated, at the level of sovereignty itself. Queen Liliuokalani ascends to the Hawaiian throne in 1891, the last monarch of a kingdom that has been slowly colonized in everything but name, and she understands, with the clarity of someone who has watched the process from the inside for decades, that the legal and political mechanisms that have dispossessed her people are not inevitable. They are choices, and choices can be unmade. Her proposed Constitution of 1893 would restore voting rights to native Hawaiians stripped by the Bayonet Constitution of 1887, a document forced upon her predecessor King Kalakaua at gunpoint effectively by a committee of safety whose membership overlapped almost entirely with plantation ownership and management. 13 men, most of them connected to the Big Five and their commercial networks, constitute the Committee of Safety that organizes the January 1893 coup. U.S. Marines from the USS Boston land in Honolulu, not to restore order but to intimidate any Hawaiian military response to the overthrow of a government the United States has formally recognized. The U.S. Senate's Morgan Report of 1894, conducted at the request of those who organized the annexation lobby, attempts to absolve the American minister John Stevens of complicity. But Queen Liliuokalani's own memoir, Hawaii's Story by Hawaii's Queen, published in 1898, provides a contemporaneous account that the official record has never satisfactorily answered. The plantation hadn't just grown sugar, it had grown enough power to topple a government. And here the second great twist of this story announces itself, the one that makes the pattern impossible to ignore. It was not ambition alone that drove the annexation of Hawaii to the United States in 1898. It was a tariff. The McKinley Tariff of 1890 had eliminated the preferential trade status that allowed Hawaiian sugar to enter American markets at competitive prices, and the effect on plantation revenues was immediate and severe. The solution the Big Five and their allies pursued was not market adaptation, not crop diversification, not any of the adjustments that a genuinely independent agricultural industry might consider. The solution was the permanent elimination of the tariff barrier through political absorption, the annexation of the entire island chain as an American territory, accomplished via the Newlands Resolution signed by President William McKinley in July 1898, with Sanford Dole, the son of a missionary and cousin to the man who will eventually put pineapples in American kitchens, installed as the first territorial governor. On August 12, 1898, the Hawaiian flag is lowered from Iolani Palace for the last time. The ceremony is brief. Reports describe Hawaiian onlookers weeping in silence on the palace grounds. The sugar industry's response to the ceremony is not documented in the same emotional register because the sugar industry had already moved on to calculating the post-annexation tariff savings. They hadn't annexed a country. They had expanded a factory floor. The Organic Act of 1900, which formally organizes Hawaii as an American territory, contains a provision whose consequences the plantation system's architects have either underestimated or chosen not to examine too carefully. It extends U.S. federal law to Hawaii, and U.S. federal law does not permit penal labor contracts. The Masters and Servants Act, the legal foundation of plantation labor control for 50 years, becomes unenforceable overnight. plantation managers who had confidently predicted that Hawaiian sugar production would collapse without coercive contracts discover almost immediately that the workers whose legal chains have just been severed have something more to say. The 1909 Oahu sugar strike, organized by Fred Makino, publisher of the Nippu Jiji newspaper, one of the few Japanese-language publications in Hawaii that consistently covered labor conditions from the workers' perspective, and Yasutaro Soga, the editor of the Yamato Shimbun, mobilizes thousands of Japanese plantation workers across multiple Oahu plantations in a strike that lasts for months and costs the industry losses that Hawaii Sugar Planters Association records document in the language of alarm. The plantation owners respond not with negotiation, but with eviction, mass arrests, and the rapid importation of Filipino workers as replacement labor. The first significant Filipino immigration to Hawaii, engineered specifically to break the strike. They removed the chain. The machine simply found a new one. The Filipino workers who arrive beginning around 1906 enter a system that has already rehearsed its strategies for managing labor resistance, and they discover those strategies applied to them with the full institutional force of 100 years of accumulated plantation power. Pablo Manlapit, a labor organizer of extraordinary courage and tactical intelligence who has already served time in a Hawaiian prison for his organizing activities, leads the 1920 plantation strike that marks the first genuine attempt at cross-ethnic labor unity in Hawaiian history. Japanese and Filipino workers striking simultaneously, a development that the HSPA's own documents treat as an existential threat. The 1920 strike eventually collapses under the weight of mass evictions, imported workers, and legal prosecution. But 4 years later, on September 9, 1924, on the island of Kauai near the town of Hanapepe, the logic of plantation control reaches the endpoint that such logics always eventually reach. A confrontation between striking Filipino workers and police and plantation-aligned special deputies results in the deaths of 16 Filipino strikers and 4 law enforcement officers in what becomes known as the Hanapepe Massacre. The coroner's inquest, held in Lihue, produces testimony and findings preserved in Hawaii state archives that document the sequence of events with the careful neutrality of official records doing their best not to assign institutional responsibility. Federal labor investigators arrive. Reports are written. They counted the dead. They did not count the system that produced them. Washington's relationship with the Hawaiian plantation economy throughout the 1930s follows a pattern that, once you've seen it in this context, you begin to recognize everywhere in American institutional history. The pattern of documentation substituted for action. Congressional hearings on Hawaiian labor conditions produce reports of genuine detail and occasional moral clarity. Wages below subsistence in plantation camps, living conditions documented by investigators whose own language sometimes breaks through official restraint into something approaching outrage. The Big Five, whose political connections to both major parties in Washington are maintained through campaign contributions, lobbying relationships, and the straightforward argument that Hawaiian sugar is strategically important to American food security, respond to each wave of investigation with cooperation, documentation, and successful resistance to any structural change that would touch land ownership, vertical integration, or the agency system that concentrates economic power in 5 hands. Into this landscape, in 1944, steps Jack Hall, the Hawaiian regional director of the International Longshore and Warehouse Union, a man whose FBI file will eventually run to thousands of pages, and whose organizing genius consists largely of understanding that the multi-ethnic composition of Hawaii's plantation workforce, which the Big Five had always treated as a system of division, could instead be a source of extraordinary collective strength. The ILWU organizing drives of the mid-1940s produced the first plantation-wide collective bargaining agreements in Hawaiian history, transforming overnight the wage structure and working conditions of tens of thousands of plantation employees, and demonstrating in the process that the system of control had been held together not by inevitability but by the deliberate engineering of powerlessness. But here the third and most quietly devastating twist emerges. The unionization victory, comprehensive and real as it is, does not touch the land. The ILWU wins wages, hours, grievance procedures, seniority rights, everything that a labor contract can win. What a labor contract cannot win is the redistribution of the 2 million acres that the missionary descendants and their business successors hold in fee simple. The Ahupua'a systems that once organized Hawaiian communities now converted into plantation acreage and, increasingly, into something even more valuable. Every investigation produced documentation, every report described the system's operations in careful detail, but no investigator, federal, territorial, or journalistic, ever proposed breaking up the vertical integration of the Big Five, redistributing plantation land, or restoring any form of the communal land tenure that the Mahele had dismantled a century before. They wrote it all down. The plantation filed the report and kept running. When Hawaii achieved statehood in 1959, the 50th state, a milestone celebrated with genuine joy by many of the descendants of contract workers who have made this place their home across 3 and 4 generations, the Big Five continued to control an estimated 75% of the private land in the islands, and the plantation economy, while beginning to feel the pressure of rising wages and falling global commodity prices, remained structurally intact. Daniel Inouye, the son of Japanese immigrants whose parents arrived under circumstances those plantation-era labor contracts defined, becomes one of Hawaii's first U.S. senators, a biographical arc of genuine significance representing a real transformation in the social order of the islands. But the land does not move. The Hawaii Land Reform Act of 1967 attempts to address the feudal concentration of land ownership through a mechanism of compulsory leasehold conversion, allowing homeowners on leased land to compel the sale of the underlying fee interest, a partial, legally contested intervention that survives a Supreme Court challenge in 1984 but produces only modest redistribution of agricultural acreage. Jack Hall, by this point, has watched the machinery of Hawaiian capital adapt to each new constraint with the smooth efficiency of a system that has been adapting to constraints for more than a century. The workers won wages, the owners won something larger, permission to sell the land for 10 times its agricultural value. The decline of Hawaiian sugar is not a dramatic failure, it is a slow calculation reaching its inevitable conclusion. Global sugar prices fall across the 1970s and 1980s as Brazilian and other tropical producers enter commodity markets at costs that Hawaiian plantations, with their union wages, aging infrastructure and high shipping overhead, cannot match. Plantation after plantation closes, first the smaller operations on Oahu and the Big Island, then the Maui operations one by one, each closure announced in the language of economic necessity, each one displacing workers whose families have lived on that land for 3 or 4 generations without ever owning an acre of it. By September 2016, only one sugar plantation remains operational in Hawaii. Hawaiian Commercial and Sugar Company on Maui, owned by Alexander and Baldwin, the direct corporate descendant of Henry Perrine Baldwin's original enterprise. Alexander and Baldwin CEO Christopher Benjamin announces the closure in January of that year, citing global commodity prices and the economics of Hawaiian land that has, by 2016, a value in resort and residential development that dwarfs anything sugar can produce. The final harvest is completed in the fall. The plantation's acreage at closure encompasses tens of thousands of Maui acres that have grown cane continuously for more than a century and a half. The workforce that once numbered in the thousands has, through decades of mechanization, been reduced to a fraction of that. The ILWU Hawaii issues a statement. The Maui News covers the closure with the mixture of nostalgia and relief that attends the death of something that was simultaneously a livelihood and a wound. And then, at the Pu'unene Mill in central Maui, the rollers stop. The boilers cool across hours and then days. The low mechanical groan that has been continuous background noise in this part of the island since the 1880s simply ceases. The smell of burnt cane, that sweet, acrid, omnipresent smell that generations of Maui residents have described as the smell of home, whether they loved it or hated it, fades from the air over days and weeks until it is gone. 181 years of continuous sugar production in Hawaii ends not in catastrophe, not in reform, not in any reckoning with the Mahele or the Masters and Servants Act or the overthrow or the Hanapepe dead. It ends in a balance sheet. The machine did not fail. It extracted what it came to extract, and when extraction became less profitable than conversion, when the land was worth more sold to resort developers than planted in cane, it converted. Stand at the edge of what used to be a cane field in central Maui today, and the silence is not the silence of resolution. The volcanic soil beneath the fallow ground is the same soil the Ahupua'a managed for 1,000 years before the Thaddeus arrived. The water in the irrigation ditches that still cross this landscape was redirected from the same streams 150 years ago and has never been redirected back. Somewhere in a box in the Hawaii State Archives, the Mahele book still lists its columns of names and parcels in careful 19th century handwriting. The plantation never collapsed. It simply converted. And somewhere in that conversion, in the seamless translation of agricultural extraction into real estate extraction, in the land that changed hands without ever returning to the hands that first knew it, there is a question that no commission has ever been convened to answer, no report has ever been commissioned to address, no official record has ever been opened to explain. What exactly was the name of what was taken, and whether there is a word in any of the languages spoken on these islands, Hawaiian, Japanese, Filipino, Portuguese, Chinese, that means the return of something that was never lost, only removed?